Let me ask you something honestly. Have you ever felt like your life is smaller than it should be? Like you're capable of more, but somehow you keep living the same year over and over again? Today, we're going to talk about something that changes lives quietly but powerfully. The power of thinking big. There is a quiet frustration many people live with, but rarely talk about. It's the feeling that your life is smaller than it should be. Not terrible. Not completely broken, just smaller. You wake up, go to work, come home, repeat the same routine again and again. Days turn into weeks. Weeks turn into years, and somewhere deep inside you, there is a voice that whispers, "Is this really it?" You see other people building things, creating businesses, changing their lives, traveling, growing. And you wonder something, you almost feel guilty for thinking, "Why not me?" But then another voice quickly answers, "Be realistic. People like you don't do things like that. You should just be grateful for what you have." So you silence the first voice. You lower your expectations. You shrink your dreams until they become reasonable. Instead of imagining the life you truly want, you start negotiating with reality. I just want to be a little more comfortable. I just want a slightly better job. I just want things to be a bit easier. And little by little, without noticing, your world becomes smaller. Not because you lack talent, not because you lack intelligence, but because somewhere along the way, you stopped allowing yourself to think big. Many people believe the biggest obstacle to success is lack of opportunity. But in reality, the first thing most people lose is permission to dream. Permission to imagine something greater. Permission to believe their life could become something extraordinary. When we are children, thinking big is natural. A child will say they want to be an astronaut, a movie director, an inventor, a world traveler. They don't worry about statistics. They don't ask if it's realistic. They just imagine. But as we grow older, something changes. Life teaches us to be careful. Teachers tell us to be practical. Friends tell us not to aim too high. Society quietly rewards people who stay within safe limits. And slowly, our dreams shrink. Not in one dramatic moment, but in 1,000 tiny ones. A failed attempt, a critical comment, a rejection, a moment of embarrassment. Each time it happens, we unconsciously make a decision. Maybe I shouldn't aim so high. So instead of asking, what is the greatest life I could possibly create, we start asking a much smaller question. What is the safest life I can manage? And that shift changes everything, because the size of your thinking determines the size of your life. People rarely live beyond the limits they set in their own mind. The tragedy is not that most people fail. The tragedy is that most people never even try to imagine how far they could go. They spend their lives managing problems instead of building possibilities, surviving. Instead of expanding, existing. Instead of creating. And one day, often much later than they expected, a quiet realization appears. Maybe in their late 30s. Maybe in their 40s. Maybe even later, they look back and ask themselves a painful question. What would have happened if I had just believed bigger? What if you had applied for that opportunity? What if you had started that idea? What if you had trusted that small voice inside you that once said, you could do something extraordinary? The truth is, thinking small feels safe. But it slowly becomes a cage. And the most dangerous thing about that cage is this. The door is usually open. Most people are not trapped by their circumstances. They are trapped by the size of their thinking. The moment someone begins to think bigger, the direction of their entire life can change. But before that happens, there is something important we must understand. Because the reason most people stop thinking big is not laziness. It's not lack of ambition. It's something much deeper. And once you understand it, you may never see your own limits the same way again. If thinking big has so much power, why do so many people stop doing it? The answer is not laziness. It's not a lack of intelligence. And it's not because people don't want a better life. The real reason is something far more human. Most people stop thinking big because at some point, life taught them that dreaming comes with pain. Think about the first time you tried something ambitious. Maybe you wanted to start a business. Maybe you wanted to create something meaningful. Maybe you wanted to change your life in a bold way. At first, you felt excited. Your mind filled with possibilities. You imagined what life could look like if things actually worked out. But then reality showed up. Someone laughed at your idea. Someone told you it wasn't realistic. Maybe you tried and failed. Failure has a strange effect on the human mind. It doesn't just hurt in the moment. It plants a seed of doubt that quietly grows over time. After one disappointment, your mind sighs. Maybe that was just bad luck. After 2 or 3, the voice changes. Maybe this just isn't for me. And after enough attempts, something more dangerous happens. You stop trying, not because you gave up completely, but because you quietly lowered your expectations of what your life could become. This is one of the most common psychological patterns in adulthood. People rarely abandon their dreams dramatically. They simply make them smaller, safer. Less visible. Instead of saying, I want to build something great, they say, I just want stability. Instead of saying, I want to create a life I'm proud of, they say, I just want to avoid problems. And there is nothing wrong with wanting stability. But when stability becomes the only goal, growth disappears. Another reason people stop thinking big is fear of judgment. Human beings are wired to care about what others think. Starting something ambitious means people might watch you fail. Thinking big means you might look foolish if things don't work out. So the mind creates a defense mechanism. Don't aim too high. Don't stand out too much. Just stay where it's safe. Over time, this mindset becomes invisible. You begin believing that your current life is the only realistic option, and that belief becomes your ceiling. But there is one more reason many people stop thinking big. Exhaustion. Modern life drains people. Long work hours, financial pressure, family responsibilities, endless distractions from phones, news, and social media. When a person is constantly tired, the mind shifts into survival mode. In survival mode, the brain doesn't ask, how can I build something great? It asks, how can I just get through today? Dreaming requires energy. Vision requires mental space. So many lives slowly become about maintenance. Pay the bills. Solve the next problem. Handle the next responsibility. Repeat. Years pass like this, and the idea of changing everything begins to feel unrealistic. But here is the truth that changes everything. The difference between people who transform their lives and people who remain stuck is rarely intelligence. It's rarely talent, and it's almost never luck. The biggest difference is this. Some people never stop allowing themselves to think bigger than their current reality. Even when they are tired, even when they fail, even when others doubt them, they protect that ability to imagine a larger future. Because the moment a person truly begins to think bigger again, their actions start to change. Their choices start to change. Their courage starts to grow. And slowly, step by step, the life that once felt impossible begins to become possible. Thinking big is not about ego. It is about expanding what you believe is possible for your life, and that is exactly what we're going to explore next. Now, when people hear the phrase, think big, many imagine something unrealistic. They picture someone shouting motivational slogans, promising overnight success, claiming anyone can become a billionaire if they just believe hard enough. But that's not what real thinking big looks like. Thinking big is not about fantasy. It's about expanding the way you see your own potential, because the size of your thinking changes the way your brain searches for solutions. When someone thinks small, their mind asks small questions. How do I avoid problems today? How do I make it to the weekend? How do I survive this job a little longer? But when someone begins to think bigger, the questions change. How can I create a life that excites me? What skills could change my future? What kind of person do I want to become? And those questions quietly transform everything, because the quality of your life is largely determined by the questions you ask yourself. Here is a simple truth many people overlook. Your mind is a problem-solving machine. Every day, it searches for answers to the questions you give it. If you ask, "Why is my life so difficult?" it will give you many reasons. But if you ask, "What small step could make my life better this year?" your mind begins searching in a completely different direction. Thinking big does not mean taking huge risks overnight. The most powerful changes in life usually start with very small actions. The real power of thinking big is that it changes your direction, not just your motivation. Imagine two people standing in the same place. Both feel stuck. One believes their future will look exactly like their present, so they change nothing. The other allows themselves to imagine a bigger possibility. Not a fantasy, but a different path. Maybe learning a new skill. Maybe building something on the side. Maybe improving their health. Maybe changing their environment. The moment they believe change is possible, something subtle happens. Their attention shifts. They start noticing opportunities they ignored before. They become curious again. They become willing to try. And this is where transformation begins. Not in dramatic leaps, but in small, consistent movements toward a bigger vision. There is a powerful idea, often called the horizon effect. If you walk toward a distant mountain, you may not reach it today, but every step still moves you forward. Your position changes, your perspective changes, your opportunities change. In the same way, when someone adopts a bigger vision, their daily decisions begin to align with it. They read different things, they spend time with different people, they try things they once avoided. And over time, those small choices create massive change. Most people underestimate the compounding power of small actions guided by a bigger vision. 1 book per month, 30 minutes of learning per day, 1 new connection every week, 1 small project started instead of postponed. None of these actions seem extraordinary, but 5 years later, the difference is enormous. This is why thinking big is not dangerous. Thinking small is far more dangerous. Because when people think small, they stop experimenting. They stop growing. They stop discovering what they are capable of. And many never realize how much potential they left unexplored. When someone chooses to think bigger, something else changes too. Their relationship with failure. When your goal is tiny, every mistake feels like a disaster. But when your vision is larger than your fear, failure becomes information. It becomes feedback. It becomes part of the path. Every successful person you admire has failed more times than most people are willing to attempt. The difference is not that they avoided failure. The difference is that their vision was larger than their fear. Thinking big is not about arrogance. It is not about believing you are better than others. It is about refusing to accept a life smaller than your potential. It is about giving yourself permission to explore what you are truly capable of becoming. And sometimes, the moment that changes everything does not come from a theory or a speech. Sometimes it comes from a story about someone who once felt stuck, someone who almost gave up, someone who believed their life would never change, until one small shift in how they saw their future changed everything. And that is the story I want to share with you next. Let me tell you about a man named Michael. At 32 years old, Michael believed his life had already settled into its final shape. Not terrible, but not what he once imagined either. He worked in a small office, doing administrative tasks for a logistics company. The job paid the bills, but barely. His days looked almost identical. Wake up, rush through traffic, sit at the same desk, answer emails. Repeat. At night, he would come home exhausted, scroll on his phone, watch random videos, and go to bed. Then the same cycle would begin again. 10 years earlier, Michael had different dreams. In college, he talked about building his own business one day. He had ideas, energy, curiosity. But life happened. His father got sick. Bills started piling up. He needed stability more than risk. So he took the first job he could find and stayed. Years passed faster than he expected. One evening, after another long day at work, Michael sat in his car outside his apartment. He didn't turn off the engine right away. He just sat there, and a thought crossed his mind. If I keep living exactly like this, where will I be in 10 years? The answer frightened him, because he knew the truth. Nothing would change. The same job, the same stress, the same quiet feeling that something inside him was being wasted. That night, something small but important happened. Michael didn't make a dramatic decision. He didn't quit his job. He didn't announce a big plan. He simply made one quiet promise to himself. I'm going to start thinking bigger again. At first, that promise felt almost embarrassing. Who was he to think big? He didn't have investors. He didn't have connections. He didn't have extra money. But he did have something else. An hour each evening. So, instead of scrolling on his phone after work, he used that hour differently. He started learning. He watched videos about business. He read books about people who built companies from nothing. He studied marketing and sales. Most nights, it felt slow. Sometimes he wondered if it was pointless. But he kept going. After a few months, Eadanidia, a small online service helping local restaurants manage their delivery listings and online menus. Nothing revolutionary, but useful. The old version of Michael would have dismissed it immediately. Too difficult. Too risky. But the new version asked a different question. What if this works? So he tried. His first attempts were awkward. He made mistakes. His first 2 restaurant owners said no. The third said maybe. The fourth said yes. That first yes changed something inside him. Not because he was suddenly successful, but because he proved something to himself. Change was possible. Over the next 2 years, Michael kept his job while building his service on the side. Slowly, the clients grew. 5 restaurants. Then 10. Then 2. Then 2. Eventually, the extra income became larger than his salary. The day he left his office job was not dramatic. No applause. No grand celebration. Just a quiet sense of relief and pride. But the most important change was not financial. It was mental. The moment Michael allowed himself to think bigger again, his life began moving in a new direction. Not instantly, not magically, but steadily. 5 years after that night in the parking lot, his company was helping hundreds of restaurants across several cities. The same person, the same background, the same starting point. The only real difference was this. He stopped believing his current life was the limit of what was possible. Most people wait for the perfect moment to change their lives. But the moment that matters most is much smaller. It's the moment someone quietly decides, my life can become bigger than this. And from that moment forward, the path begins to appear. There is a quiet moment that eventually comes to everyone. Not during the busiest days, not during the loud moments of life, but in a quiet space, when you are alone with your own thoughts, and in that moment, a simple question appears. Am I living the life I am capable of living? For some people, the answer feels peaceful. But for many others, it carries a quiet discomfort, because deep down, they know something. They once imagined more growth, more freedom, more meaning, more courage. But somewhere along the way, life convinced them to shrink those dreams, to be realistic, to stay safe, to aim a little lower. At first, that choice feels reasonable, but years later, something else appears. Regret. Not regret for the mistakes you made, but regret for the chances you never took, the ideas you never explored, the version of yourself you never allowed to grow. One of the most powerful truths about life is this. Most limits are not created by circumstances. They are created by beliefs. The moment a person believes their future can be bigger than their past, something begins to change. Their decisions become braver. Their curiosity returns. Their energy shifts, and slowly, step by step, their life begins to move in a new direction. You do not need to change everything today. You do not need a perfect plan. You do not need anyone's permission. Sometimes the most powerful change begins with something incredibly simple. A decision to stop thinking small about your own life. A decision to stop underestimating what you are capable of becoming. A decision to start asking bigger questions. What could my life become if I gave my best effort for the next 5 years? What skills could I learn? What opportunities could I create? What kind of person could I grow into? Because the truth is this: the future you want is not built in one giant leap. It is built through small actions, guided by a bigger vision. And that vision begins in your mind. The moment you allow yourself to imagine something greater, the path toward it quietly begins. Maybe slowly, maybe imperfectly, but it begins. So tonight, or tomorrow morning, or whenever you find yourself in a quiet moment, ask yourself one honest question. If I stopped thinking small about my life, what would I dare to try? The answer might surprise you. And sometimes, that single question is enough to start a completely new chapter. If this message spoke to something inside you, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know what kind of life you truly want to build. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.